Bonelab from Stress Level Zero, probably one of the most hyped VR games of all time. Ever since its announcement under the codename Project 4 back in September of 2019, VR players have been desperate to get their hands on the sequel to the highly successful Boneworks. Although, this time, the game won't just be reserved for PC VR players, as Bonelab is also releasing on standalone VR headsets. The game is actually launching today for $39.99 in US dollars, $29.99 in British pounds. It'll be available on Steam, Quest 2, and the Rift Store. It's cross-buy on Meta platforms, but just know it's not cross-save, so you can't continue where you left off between the PC and standalone versions. I just want to say thanks to Meta and Stress Level Zero for providing early access to the game so I could share my thoughts on it with you all in this review. Most of the footage featured in this video was recorded from the PC version, although I do have some Quest 2 footage that I'll be showing you a little later on. So, Bonelab, right from the very beginning of the game, is an intense experience, and I'm not just talking about the locomotion, which I'll talk more about later. After rolling a dice to choose your avatar, you then have to place a noose around your own neck to proceed. Now, I'm not really sensitive to this kind of stuff in video games, but it's a pretty grim introduction to the game, and I do think that people should be aware of this scene as it can be triggering for some. But moving on, once you avoid your fate, you end up in the depths below, trying to find a way out. The game doesn't do much to explain what's going on, or why, or even what you have to do, and I actually kinda like that, as it doesn't hold your hands and you have to kind of figure everything out for yourself. In the early sections, working my way through the dark dungeons kind of reminded me of playing Half-Life 2 for the first time, with the awesome physics and interactive environments. Bone tip, you'll find these cute little collectible balls throughout the game. Don't do what I stupidly did and think you have to carry them to a point to unlock them. You just simply pull them apart and the item inside will be collected for use later on in the game. I'm ashamed to admit that it took me way too long to figure that out. Anyway, back to the game. When you eventually arrive in the Bonelab, this is where the game opens up into 6 areas for you to explore, which you can do in any order you like. It took me a little while to get my head around this. Essentially, think of these areas as a series of minigames. Number 1 is Tactical Trials. These are timed combat runs where you have to take out all the null men as fast and as accurately as you possibly can. Your high scores will be placed in an online leaderboard, which you can see at the beginning of every level. Area 2 is the Arena. Here you'll have to gather void energy from 3 points to open up a portal to escape, or there's also a straight up survival mode. I didn't really gel with the Arena mode immediately, but after discovering the jump pads, doing slow-mo, mid-air shots, and also going toe-to-toe with what looks like a Terminator, it actually ended up being one of my favorite modes to play. Next up is the Sandbox. There's loads of stuff to do here, from a gun range to try all the weapons that you've unlocked, to a mirror area where you can admire your avatars. Maybe I did a bit too much admiring of my avatar, but looking down and seeing a pair of virtual boobs for the first time with their own physics was actually more fun than I could have ever imagined. Moving on though, this brings me to the parkour area. Here they have a map where you have to jump around to collect a number of keys, but my favorite was this rooftop run that's essentially a recreation of Trinity's rooftop escape scene from the original Matrix movie. Throwing agents off buildings and slow-mo jumping from rooftop to rooftop was just awesome fun. Next is Experimental. Right now all there is this bowling alley. Kind of boring to be honest, but I have a feeling more content will be added here in the future. And that brings me nicely onto mods. Modding is going to play a huge part of this game in the future. Custom maps, custom modes, custom avatars, all created by the community and then uploaded to the game. Modding was also a big part of the original Boneworks, but it wasn't really straightforward. Stress Level Zero have embraced modding this time around in Bonelab by making mods super easy to find, download, and install, even on the Quest 2. It can all be done from either the game's main menu or from the mod area within the Bonelab. I can't wait to see what the VR community come up with for this game in the future. I'd personally love to see some multiplayer modes that I can play with my friends, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Quick bone tip, you have to play at least one of the levels from each area to unlock these power modules that sit above each door. Once the power modules are unlocked, they can be collected with the huge crane in the center of the Bonelab and then slotted into place. Once all the power modules have been collected, you can then proceed with the second half of the main quest line through the quarantine area. Now in my playthrough, it took me around 7 hours to get through the main questline, but after that the game is pretty much infinitely replayable by trying to find all the collectible items, along with trying out mods and the various sandboxes which are available where you can just make your own fun. For those of you that are looking for a cohesive story, you're going to be disappointed. Just like the original Boneworks, the story in Bonelab is kind of all over the place, and relies on you, the player, to read all the notepads that are lying around and making your own interpretation of what's going on. But to be honest, most people won't care for the story and are just here for the physics-based combat, and this is where Bonelab has its biggest strength and also, in my opinion, its biggest weakness. The physics-based combat is great, whether you're swinging a club, shanking some poor soul with a knife, or blasting your way through an arena with a shotgun. Once you've got that muscle memory down, it makes you feel totally awesome and empowered as a player. But on the flip side, due to the heavy physics-based nature of the game, there's just a lot of jankiness that goes with it. Hands will just look weird at times, you'll no doubt find yourself unintentionally pulling guns out of holsters and losing them in the environment, unclipping mags by accident, the list just goes on and on. And this kind of brings me nicely onto comfort. When it comes to comfort, it's like the team at Stress Level 0 just threw the rulebook out of the window, as this is the first game in a long time that actually made me feel motion sickness. And that's really rare nowadays, especially outside of modded games that were never intended to be played in VR. The climbing sections, the go-karts, the roller coasters, the jumping, it all looks awesome fun on video, but when you're actually playing them, they don't make you feel good, and in some instances will actually make you feel as sick as a dog. I would say if you're new to VR to avoid this game completely until you've had a decent amount of time experiencing other games in VR, because this is going to be rough for a lot of people and even the most veteran VR players are gonna feel it. So just be warned. Back to the good stuff though. One major feature of Bonelab over Boneworks is their new avatar body swapping system. In the later stages of the game, you'll have the opportunity to collect a range of different avatar bodies, which you'll be able to swap out on the fly. Each avatar has a unique ability that will help you overcome obstacles in your path. Like the tall avatar is great for climbing, the heavy avatar is great at punching the crap out of enemies, which is also a really good stress reliever by the way, and the fast avatar is great for the jumping parkour sections. Each avatar comes with their own stats, which might make them faster, but more vulnerable when it comes to taking damage from enemies, for example. It was during this late section of the game where I could swap between the avatars that I found myself having the most fun, as I could be more creative with my approach to situations. Once this ability is unlocked, you can also import custom avatars into the game from the mod section, and even prior to the game's release, there were already a few avatars which you could download directly from the game's menu system, like this absolute unit that was almost the same size as the Bonelab itself. I'm not sure how useful this particular avatar will be, but it's pretty cool nevertheless. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, for the first time in the series, Bonelab will be releasing on standalone VR headsets with the Quest 2. I can't tell you just how impressive this feat is, so major props to the team at Stress Level 0 for pulling this off. Getting all the physics in, along with the game still looking as good as it does, and have it running at 90 frames per second natively on the Quest 2, I'm sure this took an immense effort from the team. Apart from the obvious graphical downscaling and heavy use of fixed foveated rendering, the core gameplay mechanics are kept completely intact. I have no doubt that the Quest 2 community are going to go absolutely nuts for this game. Something else that really stood out for me in Bonelab that I'm sure many will overlook is the incredible soundtrack. Just like the original game, the Bonelab soundtrack has some fantastic tunes. Just listen to this absolute banger from one of the tech trials. I actually want to buy this soundtrack so I can listen to it outside of playing the game. So here's my conclusion. Bonelab is kind of like Boneworks 1.5. Aside from the avatar system and the mods, it's pretty much more of the same, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The story is lacking in my opinion, but I understand that's not what people will be looking for with Bonelab. Players will be looking for the crazy physics-based combat, sandbox environments, and community modding which will make this game one that people will continue to play for months to come. The most impressive part of Bonelab for me is just that it's running on Quest 2. Again, amazing work from Stress Level 0. And just to reiterate, this is a game for the VR hardcore, made by the VR hardcore. It has what many experienced players in the VR scene have been looking for, but it's not for VR newcomers and those that are prone to VR motion sickness. Having completed the game, I'm not in a massive rush to return to it, although I have to say I am looking forward to seeing what the community come up with in terms of mods. So, that's all from me today. I hope the video helped you in some way understand the game a little bit better. If it did, please leave a cheeky little like. Also, let me know what you think of Bonelab in the comments. Are you excited for this game? If so, what headset do you plan to play it on? Do you wish there was more story to it, or maybe you're concerned about the intense movements in the game as you suffer from VR motion sickness? Either way, I'd love to know all your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of my VR content, and as always, I'll see you all on the next one. Cheers.